Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the fascinating Swiss city of Lucerne. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The train pulled into Lucerne station just after 9 in the morning, gliding smoothly to a stop, with the precision Lyla had come to expect from Swiss rail. She gathered her backpack. She'd brought a change of clothes, not certain whether she'd stay the night in Lucerne or return to Zurich, and stepped onto the platform into a perfect June morning. The air was fresh and cool, carrying a hint of the lake and the mountains beyond. Lucerne station was modern and efficient, all glass and clean lines, but as soon as she stepped outside, the view stopped her in her tracks. Lake Lucerne stretched before her, impossibly blue, and behind it rose the Alps, dramatic peaks still touched with snow even in early summer, their reflections shimmering on the water's surface. She oriented herself with the map on her phone and began walking toward the old town, crossing the modern bridge near the station. The Chapel Bridge was just a few blocks away, and Lyla felt a small thrill of anticipation. She'd seen photographs, of course, but there was something about seeing historic landmarks in person that no image could quite capture. The bridge announced itself gradually, first a glimpse through buildings, then more of its distinctive covered wooden structure, and finally the full view as she reached the riverside. The Chapel Bridge stretched across the Riesch River in a diagonal line, its dark wooden roof supported by a series of trusses, the octagonal water tower rising from the river midway across. Lyla stepped onto the bridge and immediately understood its appeal. The covered walkway provided shade and shelter, with windows on both sides offering views of the river and the city. But what made it truly special were the paintings, over 100 triangular panels mounted in the roof trusses, each one depicting scenes from Swiss and Lucerne history, religious stories, and the lives of the city's patron saints. She walked slowly, pausing to examine the paintings. They dated from the 17th century, though she knew many were reproductions. A fire in 1993 had destroyed much of the bridge and many of the original panels. But the reproductions were beautifully done, and the overall effect was still remarkable, like walking through a covered gallery of history. The water tower stood solid and picturesque in the middle of the river, its octagonal form reflected in the calm water. It had served various purposes over the centuries: watchtower, prison, treasury, torture chamber, though now it was simply an icon, arguably Switzerland's most photographed monument after the Matterhorn. On the bridge, other visitors moved in both directions, stopping to photograph the paintings or the views. A group of schoolchildren passed by, their teacher explaining something in Swiss German while the kids half listened, more interested in peering through the windows at the swans gliding below. Lyla crossed to the far side and then recrossed on the parallel Speyer Bridge, another covered wooden bridge further downstream. This one was narrower and less visited, decorated with panels depicting the dance of death, the medieval allegory where death leads all, rich and poor, young and old, to their final rest. It was darker in theme than the Chapel Bridge, but equally fascinating. From the Speyer Bridge, she made her way into the old town proper. Lucerne's Altstadt was a warren of narrow streets and small squares, the buildings painted in soft pastels, yellows and pinks and blues, many decorated with elaborate frescoes depicting historical or allegorical scenes. She wandered into Weinmarkt, one of the old town's main squares. The buildings here were particularly beautiful, their facades covered in frescoes showing everything from biblical scenes to local legends to purely decorative patterns. The fountain in the square's center featured a Gothic spire, and the surrounding buildings housed shops and restaurants on their ground floors, apartments above. From Weinmarkt, she found her way to Kornmarkt, another square, with similar character. A pharmacy occupied one corner, its sign marking it as one of the city's historic establishments. The buildings here also bore frescoes, and Lyla took her time studying them, admiring the craftsmanship and the way they transformed ordinary buildings into works of art. The old town's streets connected these squares in a seemingly haphazard pattern that was typical of medieval cities. Lyla wandered without a fixed route, discovering small alleys that opened into unexpected courtyards, shops selling everything from Swiss watches to local cheeses, restaurants advertising fondue and raclette and rösti. The painted guildhouses were particularly striking, buildings that had belonged to various medieval trade guilds, their facades decorated with frescoes identifying their original purposes and celebrating their crafts. Even in their current commercial uses, these buildings maintained their historic character, creating a sense of continuity between past and present. Lyla found a small bakery on a quiet side street, its window displaying an array of pastries and breads. Inside, the shop was warm and fragrant, the smell of fresh baking filling the small space. A handful of small tables near the window provided seating, and Lyla ordered a coffee and a nussgipfel, a croissant-like pastry filled with nut paste. She claimed a table by the window and settled in, watching the street outside while she ate. The pastry was excellent, flaky and rich, the nut filling sweet but not cloying. The coffee was strong and perfectly brewed, served in a proper ceramic cup rather than a paper-to-go container. An elderly couple came in and ordered in Swiss German, their conversation with the baker friendly and familiar, clearly regulars. A young woman with a baby in a stroller bought several loaves of bread, balancing them on top of the stroller while maneuvering back out the door. A businessman in a suit grabbed a pastry and a coffee to go, exchanging pleasantries with the baker before hurrying back out. It was a perfect slice of local life, and Lyla felt grateful to have found this place, rather than one of the more tourist-oriented cafes near the chapel bridge. After finishing her coffee, she thanked the baker and continued her exploration. She'd read about Lucerne's medieval city walls and decided to walk a section of them. The walls were partially preserved, with several towers still standing, and walkways that allowed visitors to climb up and walk along portions of the ramparts. She found a set of stairs leading up to the wall and began climbing. The walkway along the wall was narrow but well maintained, with wooden railings and informational signs explaining the fortification's history. From up here, Lyla could see over the old town's rooftops, a sea of terracotta tiles and church spires, the lake visible beyond, the mountains rising in the distance. She walked along the wall for several hundred meters, occasionally ducking through towers where the walkway was interrupted. Other visitors passed going the opposite direction, and everyone exchanged polite greetings, as seemed to be the Swiss custom. The views were spectacular, offering perspectives on the city that weren't possible from street level. She could see the layout of the old town, understand how the river and lake had shaped the city's development, identify landmarks she'd visited, and others she wanted to see. By the time she descended back to street level, it was approaching lunchtime. She made her way back toward the lakeside, thinking about the restaurants near the train station that she'd noticed on her arrival. She found a restaurant with a terrace overlooking the lake, its tables shaded by large umbrellas. The view was extraordinary, the lake stretching out in shades of blue and green, mountains rising dramatically on the far shore, boats of all sizes moving across the water. Lyla was seated at a table near the railing and given a menu. She ordered egg fillet, perch fillets from the lake, a local specialty, and a glass of Swiss white wine. While she waited, she watched the lake activity. A paddle steamer, white and elegant, was approaching the nearby dock, its passengers visible on deck. Swans glided near the shore, occasionally honking at each other, or at unwary tourists who came too close. Sailboats tacked across the lake, their sails bright against the blue water. The perch arrived, lightly breaded and fried, served with tartar sauce and a generous portion of fries. The fish was fresh and delicate, and Lyla ate slowly, savoring the meal and the view. The wine was crisp and minerally, a perfect complement to the fish. After lunch, she walked to the dock, where the lake cruise ships departed. She'd decided to take a cruise on Lake Lucerne, curious to see the lake and mountains from the water. The next departure was in about 20 minutes, so she bought a ticket and joined the queue of other passengers waiting to board. The ship was one of the classic paddle steamers, beautifully maintained, with polished wood and brass fittings that gleamed in the sunlight. Passengers began boarding, and Lyla made her way to the upper deck, finding a spot at the railing where she'd have an unobstructed view. The ship pulled away from the dock with a deep horn blast, and they began moving out onto the lake. The water was calm, creating barely a ripple as the paddle wheels churned. Lucerne's waterfront gradually receded, the city becoming more compact and picturesque with distance, the mountains behind becoming more prominent. An older man stood at the railing near Lyla, his two grandchildren, a boy and girl perhaps 8 and 10, bouncing excitedly beside him. The children were speaking rapid German mixed with British English. They lived in the UK perhaps? They were excitedly pointing at various sights and asking questions that the grandfather answered patiently. "Opa, is that Mount Pilatus?" the boy asked in English, pointing at a particularly dramatic peak. "Yes, that's right," the grandfather confirmed. "And that lower one there is Rigi. We'll see them both better as we go around." The children ran off to the other side of the deck, and the grandfather smiled apologetically at Lyla. "Sorry for the noise. They're very excited. First boat ride of the summer." "They're lovely," Lyla said. "I think they're enjoying your company." "I hope so," he laughed. "I'm certainly enjoying theirs, even if they do wear me out." His English was excellent, with just a trace of a German accent. "Are you visiting Lucerne?" "Just for the day," Lyla said, "though I might stay the night. I haven't decided yet." "Ah, the best kind of travel, flexible plans," he said. "I'm Werner, by the way." "Lyla." They fell into conversation, and Werner, like many locals when talking to interested visitors, began sharing stories about Lucerne and the lake. He'd lived in the city his entire life, he said, except for a brief interlude while he studied at Oxford. His grandchildren lived there now with his daughter and her husband, and were visiting during their school holiday. This lake has been central to the region's history for centuries, he explained, gesturing at the water around them. It's not just one lake really, but several connected bodies of water, creating this irregular shape you see. Different arms extending into the mountains, each one leading to different valleys and communities. He pointed out various landmarks as they passed. Small lakeside villages with church spires, hotels clinging to hillsides, ferry docks where the ship would eventually stop. Lucerne was always a crossroads, he continued. The Gotthard Pass, one of the main routes through the Alps, is just south of here. So for centuries, merchants and travelers and armies have passed through Lucerne on their way over the mountains to Italy. The chapel bridge must have seen a lot of history, Lyla said. Oh yes, Werner nodded enthusiastically. Built in the 14th century as part of the city's fortifications. The paintings in the roof, did you notice them? I did, Lyla said. They're remarkable. They tell the city's history, the stories of the patron saints. It's a kind of visual history lesson for anyone crossing the bridge. Very clever, really. Educating the population through public article, he smiled. The fire in 1993 was devastating, I remember it. The whole city mourned. But we rebuilt it, restored the paintings as best we could. It's not quite the same as the original, but it's still our bridge, still part of who we are. His grandchildren returned, demanding that Opa come look at something on the other side of the ship. He excused himself with a smile, and Lyla was left to enjoy the cruise in peaceful solitude. The ship continued its journey, stopping at various small towns and villages along the shore. Each stop brought new passengers and allowed others to disembark, the whole operation smooth and efficient. The views were constantly changing. Sometimes the lake narrowed, squeezed between steep mountains. Other times it opened into wider basins surrounded by gentler slopes. The air off the lake was fresh and cool, and Lyla felt completely relaxed, content to stand at the railing and watch the scenery unfold. Other passengers shared the deck, couples walking arm in arm, families with children, solo travelers like herself, all of them appreciating the beauty of the lake and mountains. After about an hour and a half, the ship returned to Lucerne, docking smoothly at the pier. Lyla disembarked with the other passengers and checked the time. Early afternoon, plenty of time for another adventure. She'd been thinking about Mount Rigi, the queen of the mountains, which was accessible by cogwheel railway from Witznau, a short boat ride across the lake. She bought a ticket for the combined boat and mountain railway journey, and boarded the next boat to Witznau. This was a smaller vessel than the paddle steamer, more utilitarian but still comfortable. The crossing took about 40 minutes, following the lake's southern shore, and Lyla spent the time on deck, enjoying more views of the water and mountains. At Witznau she disembarked and found the cogwheel railway station just steps from the boat dock. The little red train was already waiting, its steep track climbing sharply up the mountainside. She boarded and found a window seat, and soon the train began its ascent. The climb was gradual but relentless, the cogwheel mechanism engaging with the rack between the rails to pull the train steadily upward. The views opened up almost immediately. first Vistas and the lake below, then more of the lake and surrounding mountains, then finally, as they climbed higher, an increasingly vast panorama of lakes, mountains, valleys, and distant peaks. The train passed through alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers, through patches of forest, past mountain chalets with flowers in their window boxes. Other passengers exclaimed at the views, and camera shutters clicked constantly. At Rigi, the summit station, Lyla stepped out into cool, thin air. The temperature was noticeably lower than at lake level, and she was glad for her jacket. The views from the summit were breathtaking. She could see multiple lakes, mountain ranges extending in all directions, valleys, with tiny villages far below. On a clear day like this, it was said you could see 13 lakes and countless peaks. She walked along the summit trails, following paths that led to different viewpoints. Other visitors were doing the same, some hiking energetically, others moving more slowly, everyone absorbed in the spectacular scenery. Lyla found a bench at a particularly scenic spot, and sat for a long while, just taking it in. The scale of the landscape was humbling, the mountains stretching to every horizon, the lakes like blue gems set among the peaks, the evidence of glaciers and geological forces that had shaped this dramatic terrain over millions of years. Eventually, knowing she wanted to return to Lucerne before evening, she made her way back to the summit station and caught the train down. The descent offered the same views in reverse, and Lyla watched as the lake grew larger, and the mountains around it grew taller as she lost altitude. Back in Vistas, she caught a boat back to Lucerne, arriving in the late afternoon with the sun beginning its descent toward the western peaks. The light was taking on that golden quality that photographers loved, and Lucerne looked particularly beautiful, the old town glowing warm against the darkening mountains behind. Lyla decided to take a lakeside walk following the promenade that ran along the shore. The pathway was popular with locals out for evening exercise or post-work strolls, and Lyla joined the flow of walkers, moving at her own pace. The promenade led past manicured parks and grand hotels, past the Culture and Congress Center, with its distinctive modern architecture, a striking contrast to the old town's medieval character. The building's cantilevered roof extended far out over the plaza, creating a covered public space, and its position right on the water gave it commanding views of the lake. The sun was setting now, the sky turning shades of pink and orange, the mountains silhouetted against the colorful display. Swans gathered near the shore, settling in for the evening, and the lake's surface reflected the sky's colors, creating a mirror image of the sunset. Lyla found a bench and sat, watching the light show. Other people had stopped as well, everyone drawn to witness the day's transition into evening. There was a collective quiet, a shared appreciation for the beauty of the moment. As the colors faded and the sky deepened into twilight, Lyla realized she'd made her decision. She would stay the night in Lucerne. The day had been too perfect to rush away from, and the city had more to offer than she could experience in just one day. She made her way back toward the old town, now lit by street lamps and the warm glow from restaurant windows. The chapel bridge was illuminated, its reflection dancing on the dark water of the Reuss. The old town's streets had a different character now, quieter than during the day, more intimate. She found a cozy Swiss restaurant on a small square, its exterior unpretentious, its interior exactly what she'd hoped for: wood-paneled walls, checked tablecloths, a warm atmosphere that spoke of tradition and comfort. The menu offered classic Swiss dishes, and Lyla ordered älplermagronen, A hearty dish of macaroni, potatoes, cheese, cream and onions, served with applesauce on the side. It was comfort food at its finest, the kind of meal that made you understand why Swiss cuisine had developed the way it had, rich, warming, perfect for cold mountain evenings. She also ordered a small glass of Swiss red wine, and when the food arrived, she ate slowly, savoring each bite. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation, mostly locals by the sound of it, people enjoying their evening meals. The server was friendly and efficient, offering recommendations when asked, but otherwise letting diners enjoy their meals in peace. After dinner, Lyla asked the server if he knew of any nearby inns with rooms available. He made a quick phone call to a place just around the corner, spoke briefly in Swiss German, then confirmed they had a room available. "It's very nice," he assured her. "Clean, quiet, good breakfast. The owner is my cousin, so I can promise you'll be well taken care of." Lyla walked the short distance to the inn, which occupied a renovated building that managed to feel both historic and comfortable. The owner, a pleasant woman in her 50s, welcomed her warmly and showed her to a room on the second floor. The room was small but charming, with wood-beamed ceilings and a window overlooking a quiet courtyard. The furnishings were simple but high quality: a comfortable bed with a thick duvet, a small desk, an armchair by the window. The bathroom was modern and spotless. Lyla unpacked her minimal belongings and sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the courtyard. The building's other windows glowed warmly, and she could hear distant conversation and laughter, the sounds of a building housing people settling in for the night. She thought about the day, the morning walk across the chapel bridge and through the frescoed streets of the old town, the peaceful coffee in the local bakery, the views from the medieval wall, the lunch overlooking the lake, the cruise with Werner and his grandchildren, the stories about Lucerne's history, the spectacular journey up Mount Rigi and the views from the summit, the sunset walk along the promenade, and the satisfying Swiss dinner in the cozy restaurant. Lucerne had revealed itself as a city of remarkable beauty, where natural splendor and human creation existed in harmony. The lake and mountains provided the dramatic setting, but it was the city itself, with its medieval bridges and painted buildings, its preserved fortifications and modern amenities, its blend of tourism and authentic local life, that made it special. The decision to stay the night had been the right one, Lyla realized. She prepared for bed, changing into comfortable clothes and brushing her teeth. The inn was quiet now, just the occasional creak of old floorboards, or the distant sound of a door closing. Through her window she could see stars beginning to appear over the courtyard, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. Lyla climbed into bed, the duvet soft and warm, the pillow comfortable. She left the window slightly open, and cool mountain air drifted in, carrying the faint scent of the lake and the distant sound of water moving through the city. She thought about tomorrow, perhaps another walk through the old town, breakfast at the inn, maybe a visit to one of the museums she hadn't had time for today. But those were tomorrow's concerns. For now, there was just this moment, the comfortable bed, the quiet room, the peaceful feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, Lucerne settled into its nighttime rhythm. The chapel bridge stood illuminated over the dark river, the water tower reflected in the water. The lake lay calm under the stars, surrounded by mountains that rose like guardians in the darkness. And in her cozy room in the old town, Lyla drifted toward rest, grateful for the day, content with her decision to stay, peaceful in the heart of this beautiful Swiss city,